Hi, this is Dr. Emma Offord, host of This Voice is Mine, the Unquiet Podcast. For every neurodivergent mind that was masked, misread or missed, where identity is reclaimed and the system gets named, This Voice is Mine is a podcast for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too chaotic, too intense or not enough. Hosted by myself, Dr. Emma Offord, a clinical psychologist, neurodivergent woman and unapologetic system disruptor. This podcast explores what happens when difference is pathologized and what becomes possible when we drop the shame, the script and the medical model. Through stories, reflections and conversations with people who were never meant to fit, This Voice is Mine reclaims the truth of neurodivergent minds, bodies and ways of being. This is not about fixing or fitting in. It's about remembering who we are and unlearning everything they got wrong. In this, our very first episode of This Voice is Mine podcast, I'm joined by the brilliant Eliza Fricker, author, illustrator, and one of the most insightful advocates in the PDA and autism space. You might know Eliza from her Sunday Times best-selling book, Can't Not Won't, or her deeply honest and beautiful memoir, Thumbsucker, where she explores her own story with humour, tenderness and truth. Through her Missing the Mark blog and illustrations, Eliza has created a space where so many parents, educators and neurodivergent people feel truly seen. Our conversation was open, funny and profoundly validating, full of moments of recognition and laughter, a deep dive into what it really means to navigate the system while honouring difference. I think you'll love how Eliza brings compassion and clarity to subjects that often feel messy or misunderstood, and the way she invites us all to see difference, not as deficit, but as truth. I guess the concept of what I'm really trying to do here is about unspoken voices, which you and I have had.
Yeah.
And here we are speaking, and, being heard and being listened to and finding our voice, and other people enjoying our voice and finding their voice from that. So, really what I want to talk about is that partly that journey of, how we grow full size, how we come to, completely change really how we've been living our life. And I think there's something really important about understanding that journey as well as the destination of where we are right now. So before we begin, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you?
Sure. My name's Eliza Fricker. I'm an author, illustrator, mother.
Yeah.
And I probably was most known for writing Can't Not Won't, which was Sunday Times bestseller. But I've been writing under the name Missing the Mark for quite a few years. So that's a combination of text and drawing, of experiences of trying to navigate the school system as a parent with a child who's neurodivergent. And as that's gone on, it's become kind of more multi-layered, I suppose. And it's become, experiences of motherhood and parenting, but also neurodivergence as a bigger thing. Because I think for families, it's often our child that's diagnosed first, and then what follows is our own diagnosis. So it's kind of evolved and got bigger over time, I suppose.
And there's the work that you've named there, and what I see a lot of as well is the workshops that you hold and the webinars, the advocacy, the kind of spreading, the message about neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So, you have such a variety of things that you're involved in. Why don't we start with, where did this all begin? Are you able to locate where that was?
Yeah, I can absolutely locate it, because it was my daughter being at home. So my daughter had had a breakdown from school, and I found myself at home, and that was quite a final line. I think I tried to kind of continue my own work as a designer and illustrator up until that point, but it was a really kind of flailing and trying to kind of hold on to some of that work. I wasn't really able to do it anymore because my daughter was really struggling in school. But that final moment of her then not being in school and being at home, I even remember just sitting there and looking out, and we were in a flat sort of quite high up at the time, looking at the rooftops and drawing that. And then thinking I'm going to just keep drawing. You know, I remember this sort of sense of the world has sort of ended for us, and I had to kind of keep going in some capacity.
Yeah.
And so the drawing was sort of the keep going, if you like. And then I started drawing from baby photos of her, and then writing over the top, which actually did end up in Can't Not Won't, writing over the top things that people had said about my parenting and you know, me as a mother, the kind of outsiders, and drawing those over the baby photos, really. And then it sort of carried on. I started drawing people I'd met, and I kind of was drawing them with humour. So some of the professionals we'd met, I was kind of drawing them in a very, those haven't made it into the public realm, by the way. But as it went on and on, I was realising it was so cathartic for me. Yeah. And I felt that all those emails I sort of was sending to professionals at that time, and that outrage I felt was just going nowhere, and was actually really exposing for me and for us as a family. So being able to use the things that have always been powerful for me, such as wit, was really good to put that out there, drawing these experiences and getting a bit of power back through doing that. And I had sat there sort of previously during those years and sat in those meetings and thought, I'm going to draw this one day because this is absolutely ridiculous. You know, it gets that kind of, I don't know if you've had that, but when things are sort of so ghastly and bad, they almost become quite surreal.
I was just thinking that you've got nothing to lose, because it's almost, like you say, it feels like a complete devastation. Life's gone nuclear. There's no real going back, and so you don't have anything to lose. And it kind of gives you that sense of agency of, well, I might as well, you know, have a go at this. I might as well say this. Like the mask, it gets ripped off. It doesn't come off gently. And I often talk about it. The words I use are positive disintegration. It's like, it feels as though, you know, the stability of what we've been standing on, even though it might have been things that were uncomfortable for us, and we, you know, given a different life or environment or people's attitudes, we could have had a different way of doing things, but that is just taken away, and we have to do so much rebuilding about our identity, you know, where we're going next, how we're gonna do this. And like, I'm hearing you talk about that. So you're a mum, you've got people, it sounds like, criticizing or judging or not understanding and invalidating that whole experience. So you've not got the support, you haven't got the scaffolding, and you're there trying to work out what next. Like, how do you raise your daughter? How does she get an education? How do you work? And how do you have a voice as well? So you started to do this through these illustrations. Yeah. And the words were coming forward. Then what did you do? Like, where did you take it next?
I met up with a friend of mine who's also an editor, and we met up, and she said, well, I don't know anything about this because I haven't got kids, but I reckon it'd be like quite interesting for some people. And I was like, I don't know if it would be, because no one through those years of me experiencing it seemed to get it. You know, I felt really isolated with it. So I was like, I don't think other people are going to be into this, or it's not going to resonate. She was like, well, you know, why don't you just put a blog out there, just make a little WordPressy thing and put it out there. And so that's what I did. And then I think I linked it onto Twitter, and then immediately there was this sort of feedback from it. And actually, I think one of the earliest ones was a psychologist working in like Camden Council, and she was like, oh, I've shown this to my team. And so I think it was something probably that was, obviously we know is there and very prevalent, but I think even with professionals, they're quite trapped by this stuff too. And I think it resonated with them as well, that they feel like often they're offering this kind of tick box solution for families, and they're not feeling like it's enough, or they're coming away from that feeling that they've let people down. So it kind of started to resonate on a few levels.
Yeah, until that moment where it started to resonate with others, you talk about feeling quite isolated, that your voice, you were speaking up, you were, I'm assuming, speaking to the school, speaking to other professionals on behalf of your daughter, maybe friends and family as well, and your voice wasn't being heard in all of that, or your daughter's?
No, it's a strange position to be in, and I suppose that's that those early feelings of experiences for myself. I now can look at this like this. This wasn't something at the time I realised, but I suppose what was happening was I was feeling those feelings I used to feel, those feelings of being misunderstood were coming back into it. I certainly found going into those environments as well, like deeply distressing and stressful, because what I had done for myself is moved very much away from those environments with strip lighting and lanyards and plastic chairs, and thought I'm never returning to these. And then obviously you have a child and you've got to go back into those and into these settings that are stacked with hierarchy. And I felt deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I didn't feel that any of it kind of was reflective either of the world that I was trying to build, I suppose, away from those environments.
And you mentioned earlier, and I know this is what many late identified neurodivergent people talk about, is finding their neurodivergence via, maybe their child's identification, or when things start to go wrong for the child. Usually it's in school. And so there's that reliving, and you're reliving, like you mentioned, what it might have felt for you at times being in those environments like school. And then as an adult, you're having to go in and advocate for your daughter, and having a reliving experience of people invalidating, or, you're having to go through that a second time. I mean, but you're doing this for your child as well. So there's, the consequences are very, very important, aren't they?
Yeah, it's quite a complex one, that one, because I think I had certainly thought I had really covered my tracks with my masking by becoming a wife and a mother.
Yeah.
And this felt like I had muffed that up badly. I'd mucked this up because now my child was struggling with school. As a parent, one of the main things you do, apart from get them to eat their vegetables and minimise screen time, is you get them to school.
Yeah.
So the fact that I wasn't doing that felt like almost that mask was slipping off and revealing something potentially. So that was a very complex and quite troubling time on many levels.
I can imagine. And when I hear people talk about that kind of complexity and that experience, I'm always taken back to school and how they often say school is safe. That phrase is used so often, that it's a place of safety. I know when children have had absences from school, parents have been called and they've been told, we need your child in school to keep them safe. There's such a narrative about safety in school. It's so strong that when you try to expose how it's not safe for everybody, how it wasn't safe maybe for yourself, that there's an enormity there, isn't there, about this huge dominant narrative that most people believe is true and accurate. It's bigger than the situation that you're experiencing as a mum. It's this whole systemic situation, isn't it?
And you're trying to take it on as a parent.
While reliving trauma and going into the environments that are traumatizing. And I also think about that sensory level. Like for me, going into environments, even though it might be a different school, say a different hospital or a different institution to one I might have had my experience in, they have a smell, they have a certain way of how things are lit. They have an energy, a sensory energy. So like in my body, even if my head is feeling very strong about what I'm going to say and do, my whole body's also having a sensory assault and reliving things. So I'm also imagining you going into those environments and on a physical level as well, having your nervous system have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's utterly exhausting. And then you're on top of that dealing with a child who is in deep distress most days because of the impact of that environment. So you're also having to do a lot of parenting on top of your own self feeling quite, broken.
Absolutely.
I just remember fawning massively.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in those meetings and just being the most amenable, nice, smiling, manically smiling. I think I've drawn quite a few of myself manically smiling, just to get out. And that was my way of like, this is so uncomfortable for me. I need to get out of here. And the way to get out is just be as pleasant and nice as I could. And I used to come out of there and not remember anything.
Yeah. So dissociating. And this is what people, they see the observable parts, don't they?
Yeah.
They see the smile. They see the compliance. They think it's sorted.
Yeah.
And they don't realise that actually you're in a survival response. And this is what, when I do my work and I try to say to schools, there is a thing called school trauma. Children are not all safe in school, and school is traumatising for them for these various different reasons. And they are often, what is said back to me is that doesn't exist. We can talk about that another time, but it's rejected. So that voice I have with my training and my, trauma training and experience is outright rejected. And I often think about those who haven't had that training, who can't go in and say, as a psychologist, and say, I've got trauma training, so I know what I'm talking about. You're having to learn about all of this, and maybe you don't even know you're in a survival response. Did you at the time?
No, not at that time, because I had no awareness. I say I had no awareness. This is a strange thing. I probably had an awareness that I was trying to cover up. I remember that. I got to keep covering up.
Yeah.
Whether I had that thoughts about neurodivergence, and I'm not so sure. But there wasn't really an awful lot of that masking was something that had kicked in for many years and been a learned response to difficult environments.
And what I think is really interesting about your story and what you're talking about is how it feels like with your illustrations, with the writing you were doing, there was this unquiet part of you that was like, I'm not masking. It was really trying to come to the surface. Maybe it couldn't in the meeting with the principal or whoever it was that you were with, or with the professionals, but it found its way, didn't it? It started to find its way. And you were still in disbelief because you were saying, when someone suggested you do a blog, and who's going to listen to this? But it's interesting to me to think that there's this part that's trying to find voice, trying to find a way out of the masking and the situation. So as this progresses, as you do your blog and you're getting people starting to be curious, how does your voice then begin to grow further?
I was going to say, actually, initially with that, as you were talking, something that I was thinking about is that I used to send, so after those meetings of fawning, I would send emails that were much more, I would say, myself, where I was kind of upset, annoyed. And then that would be met with confusion, obviously, because in that meeting I'd been incredibly pleasant and amenable. So why was I now kind of pushing back on that? Yeah. And again, that's a pattern through my life of people going, hang on, you said you were fine. Why are you not fine? Confusion around that. And then I think as I was drawing, it was me obviously saying, well, actually, this is how it was for me. But even doing the drawing, I would say up until not that long ago, there was part of me that thought that someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, why have you done all this? This isn't true. That's how little, I think, as neurodivergent people, we believe our own selves in this.
Yeah.
And I thought that for a very long time, that someone was going to pull me up. And I think part of that was why I initially called it Missing the Mark as well, because it took it out of it being me in a way.
Yeah. When you're describing that, I'm traveling a little bit to my own experiences, not a particular one, but just the feeling that I had then was, yes, I've always got that sense that someone's going to come along and tell me off, tell me it's rubbish. It's a feeling of shame. And so when you were talking, I was feeling that rising in me, that's the experience I have behind the masking. For me, it's often, I'm going to be shamed. And I have been shamed. And I wonder if that's been an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And only last week, I've been doing somatic experiencing. And we were doing that. We were dealing with those emotions of shame and early memories around that. And so I've now given it a colour and a shape.
Oh, are we allowed to know?
Well, it turned out it was oval and red, but it's sort of, part of that work that I've been doing since is to really kind of work out what those feelings were and where they've come from and how it all began really with that stuff. And
I think this is such an important point because to me there is something called neurodivergent-specific trauma. So we have, as a society, a level of understanding about trauma. We could say somebody being in a car crash and being badly injured. Most people can relate to that and say, I can see how that would be traumatizing for that person. But if we talk about school, and if we talk about the lived experience of being a neurodivergent person, trauma isn't necessarily understood because, well, which event led to that? And the answer is hundreds of thousands. That to you would be,
how long have you got?
To another person, but that's just going to school. That's just stepping outside. That's just somebody disagreeing with you. Believe me, it isn't. And so when you're talking about trying to identify, I think we do have to think in terms of shape and somatic experience because it is almost impossible to name all the events or even remember them because we become disembodied from them. We don't know that they're neurodivergent traumatic events. They become our weirdness or why can't I just do this? They get the internalized rejection. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something that I try and convey a lot in my work as well around how our children are perceived in this. And it's approached as a solution focused thing, isn't it? And that's never going to work. No. It's the idea is there's something there specific and then that can be fixed and then we can be moved along and off we go. And I think that is still under the assumption that environment, school, is a benign one and that it is something that this autistic child is grumbling about, such as the lighting, so we can give them sunglasses, or we'll get dimmer switches, or it's too loud, so we'll get them some headphones. And I think I had an early sense with this stuff, obviously because I was neurodivergent myself, where I was pushing back on that, and I was like, it's not that simple.
No.
But I couldn't obviously articulate that at the time, and I would probably still really struggle, to be honest, too. I mean, I don't know if you find that in your job, but going into schools, I would probably still find that difficult with those people to be able to articulate that, because something that I still do find difficult is often talking to people when there's one, an obvious hierarchy, but two, when and this is again trauma, I'm hypervigilant to assessing people and seeing if they are going to be amenable and open to what I'm saying, and I'm very good at detecting when they're not quite early on, and then I get into a whole heap of kind of stumbling over my words, and I'm not able to kind of articulate things or be as lucid because I'm just aware that they're not going to be hearing me.
Yeah, and that neurocepting, picking up the energy, picking up, that sense of threat that you aren't going to be listening, because that's also perhaps a neurodivergent trait in your nervous system, in your neurobiology, but it's also part of the trauma response. It's what we become hypervigilant to, reading the room and reading people, knowing when we can say what we really think and feel, and we absolutely when we can't.
And I'm very different in that. When I really can struggle to communicate when it's someone who I feel isn't going to get me or isn't going to be on board. My language can get really clunky, and I'm not articulate in those when I'm in those places.
And you asked me how maybe I experienced that, and so in the development of my career, where I've been more creative and chosen my own path and decided I want to do things this way, and if people gravitate to me, then that's wonderful, because it's in alignment with what they need. I have said so much more about what I think and what I believe, and it has felt threatening and it has felt deeply uncomfortable, but it has been so empowering as well at the same time, and that part is growing and growing and growing for me. I take great satisfaction now in correcting people, whereas before I would have felt the heavy shame. It would have shut me down. Physiologically, I wouldn't have been able to, like you say, articulate, because I would have felt so under threat relationally, so under threat, because I think that's one of the strongest neurodivergent experiences, especially late identified, is the relational trauma, where you're trying to stay safe in relationship, to systems, to individuals, and that's where that masking and the fawning and everything else comes into operation, doesn't it? You and I have talked here and there outside of this podcast, haven't we? And we've started to open up conversations about relationships, and I think you and I were just kind of playing with lots of different kind of ideas about the neurodivergent experience in relation to the world, to systems, to ourselves, and to other people. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, kind of openly about some of your thoughts to do with that, but also to think about, how do we, or how have you, worked through some of that relational trauma and sense of threat to find this voice that you're growing and developing? Are there things that you can name or describe to us that would help us understand, the safety maybe that you've begun to develop, to be able to have that voice?
I think through doing the work that I've been doing, I've met so many people, and that's other mothers, parents, but that's also professionals, where we have these really alive, connecting conversations, and we can talk really honestly. And I think it works in a really reciprocal way, where we're sort of opening up with each other, and it feels really safe to do that.
Yeah.
And often with the webinars that I do, it's almost like saying that stuff for others, so that it then welcomes them into that space to be able to say it too. And I just feel that, even though obviously I don't get to meet everyone, but it is a sort of community feel to that. It's very much all of us kind of being able to get louder.
Yeah.
And with an ease as well that I don't think I've had previously. And I've had obviously good friendships over the years, but this is very different. These are very specific experiences that we are sharing with each other, and being able to be open. And even when I speak to do the kind of one-on-ones with family, they're so enriching to speak to people. I spoke to someone recently, and they were quite upset, talking about their own neurodivergence, and saying that, they're worried about, the trauma element, and did they create the trauma? And, we can really thrash these things out together, and it's a lovely thing to be able to do. And they come back and we chat more, and it's just creating those safe spaces, really.
It really is. And, what so many people say to me when they feel safe enough to start to describe some of their experiences, and I can validate, I can relate, or I can explain some of that, whatever, however our conversation goes, I literally see people's shoulders drop, and the words are often, I didn't know anyone else was experiencing that. There's so much that is held and contained, and so just by knowing someone else is having that experience or has had it, just brings that sense of safety. So, for me, those voices are so important. No, we don't always get to meet every single person who might hear us, but the fact that they hear us, and that is opening something up in them, that they can relate and start to feel a sense of safety. That's a pretty incredible thing.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I think I kind of, obviously being a visual communicator, I see us all with these thick masks that are thick as walls around us. And then here we are kind of interacting and breaking those down with each other. And,